they seem to have an indomitable pioneering spirit, which, you know, was typical of Australians, I guess.
The American men were working on the planes, and they started whistling and catcalling and hey Blondie and what, any more home like you, and whistling at you. Well, you didn't do that to ladies back in those days.
No.
So by the time I got to base operation, I was pretty darn teed off. And I went in, and the office, it was full, and it had all these crews in there, and I went up to the desk, and this young officer came up, and he looked at me, and he said, "You seem awfully upset about something." And I told him, I said, "I don't know what they all think they're doing out there, caterwauling at us." And he said, quote, "Why don't you step back and turn side on and let us see?" I was so mad. And I said to him, "You are one rude yank." And he said, "No, ma'am, I'm a Southern gentleman." Anyway, that was the man I married.
Frangipanis are a tough plant that can survive neglect, heat and drought and still fill the garden with the most wonderful of perfume. And for me, that succinctly, that is what the War Brides, that is who they are.
I'm Hazel Walker, and I was born and grew up and married in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. I left on the last week in May in 1945 to come to the United States because I had married an American on the 4th of July 1944.
Okay, I met my husband in 1946, and I came to the States in 1948.
Well, it would have been approximately 10 years ago now. I had a conversation with my sister, and it was on the telephone, and she said, "I've heard this great song, you have to hear it." And it was called the Bridal Train by the Waifs, an Australian band.
Yet to say, the US Navy beamed its message will deliver brides on a one-way passage. It made big news across the nation. The bridal train leaves from Perth Station.
So she played the song for me, and instantly we began to talk about what an incredible story, this group of young women that got on this train from Perth all the way across the breadth of Australia with newborns, toddlers, to meet their husbands, to then get on the ship.
I went down to the deck, got to the wharf, got on the Lurline. We sailed across the Pacific, zigzagging all the way because the war was still going on, to the coast of South America, and then came north to San Francisco. We arrived in San Francisco at 4 o'clock in the morning on 18 June 1945.
Challenges that they had were in their relationships, because they, you know, when they first met their husbands, they'd only met them maybe 3 or 4 times. There were these long gaps, sometimes 2-3 years, before they even saw their husbands again. I mean, a couple of the War Brides hadn't even seen their husbands out of uniform. So when they went to meet them at the station, when they first arrived from Australia, they commented that they were in civvies, you know, they sort of looked very different. So they had to get reacquainted in a way with their husbands, and often that posed difficulties. The overriding theme for the majority of the War Brides was the tyranny of distance and the challenge of missing their family. Homesickness was something that they suffered a great deal of, and there were physical manifestations of that. There was depression, there were panic attacks, there was nausea, there was a real sense of, you know, how are we going to make this work? So that was a huge challenge.
They really felt very lonely. They missed their mothers. There was a very strong mother-daughter bond, and really, one woman said she would call her mother on the phone. There'd be a party line, someone would be listening in. She said, "It was terrible. I'd spend $100 and all I'd do would be cry for 10 minutes. And they just missed having their mothers to rely on. Well, their lives have been largely, the experiences as war brides have been largely overlooked. And film and literature, I think, are the ways to spread their stories about these women. They were all very courageous, resilient, resourceful, stoic. All of those things came through. Strong women.
They are incredibly courageous with what they experienced on so many levels. They are resilient. I mean, these are women that they were children of the Great Depression. They lived through World War II. They then had to, with very little resources, many of them, had to leave everything and go forward into a new life. It was an incredible leap of faith. We know there are incredible war stories that have been made from a man's perspective, the heroes of war, and rightly so. But this is another dimension of war that we have an opportunity to see. I mean, during war, it really was, World War II, it was the darkest of days. And from such dark times came incredible love. And I thought it would be fascinating to be able to see that aspect, and also to see from a woman's perspective what happened during those times from a woman's view. Evelyn she's the main protagonist in this particular story. She is an incredibly independent, incredibly strong girl, young woman. She had a very, very strong relationship with her father, and they spent many years when she was a little girl spending time on the sea, and he gave her and instilled in her that strong sense of independence. And you can see that as the story progresses, when difficulties happen, she's able to really draw upon that experience of that independence that she has. She would be the one that the other war bride and the second war bride, Peggy, very much leans on throughout this story. Peggy is a very, very young, innocent girl. She's only 16 and a half when she meets her American husband. They get married quite quickly. She falls pregnant. She has a very, very close relationship with her mother. So her mother basically helps look after the baby. So when the call comes very quickly that Peggy has to get on the train and go to America, she's basically left with this little baby that she's been lucky if she's even changed a nappy. So she's extremely naive. Has huge difficulties about even accepting the fact that she has to go. In fact, there's a few times where she actually almost physically doesn't carry on with her journey. When she gets to America, she's the one that suffers the most from homesickness, and we see how that manifests itself. The third war bride is actually perhaps the antithesis of the other two girls. She's extremely glamorous. She's also independent and intends to have a career. And she has been quite damaged. She lost her brother in the war only 3 years previously. So that really does impact on her and decisions that we see her take throughout the story. There is an actual twist in the story that focuses on the character of Evelyn, and we really get to see exactly how, apart from all the difficulties that Evelyn has had previously in her past, we are really able to see how she manages to eventually triumph over those.
They were part of the war front in Australia, part of the wartime history. They're part of women's history. Their experiences were part of the transnational history of going from one country to another. They experienced a lot of obstacles, a lot of joys, really great stories, and they've never been told before.
Shoo, 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 baby. Shoo, 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 baby. Bye, 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 baby. Da-da-da. Your papa's off to the 7 seas. Don't cry, baby. Don't sigh, baby. Bye, 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 baby. Da-da-da. When I come back, we'll live a life of thee.